Hello, Texas. Hope you can hear us well. We're going to go ahead and get started with our call tonight featuring Cliff Walker, our political director. And I'm going to go ahead and let him take it from here. But if you have questions, when we get to the questions portion, you can type into the questions box in the broadcast, or you can press 1 on the phone. What we're first going to do is hear about some updates in the ledge, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the questions that people submitted earlier in the day, and then get to your questions. So without further ado, go ahead, Cliff.
Thank you so much, Danny, and it's good to be here with you all this evening. As Danny mentioned, we'll start off with a little bit on what's happening in the legislature and our outlook on that. And then I do have a program that we're working on now that is really exciting and I think could grow to be something that has a big impact across the state. And I want to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll open it up for questions. So for starters, the legislature, as you all know, is not the most hospitable environment for Democrats and for people who care about the same priorities that we do. I think one thing that's characterized this legislative session in particular is a dramatic restructuring of how governing is done in Texas. And it's done in a way to allow for a power grab from the people who are in control at the moment. We saw it at the beginning of session when the Senate voted to change their rules, and Dan Patrick changed the rules in the Senate to lower the bar that would allow bills to come up for consideration and for a vote. And we saw this week that the Senate passed SB 17, which is open carry legislation to allow for the open carrying of handguns. And the ratio at which it passed was 20-10 in the Senate. And if the rules that had been in place over the course of the 60-year tradition were still in place, that bill wouldn't have had enough votes to go through. So we're seeing some of the policy impacts of that change. And unfortunately, we're going to see a lot more of that in the next couple of months. And one other thing that we're seeing a lot of in terms of the Republicans trying to consolidate power here in Austin is a spate of anti-local control bills. You know, our current governor, when he was Attorney General, spent a lot of time suing the federal government, arguing for more local control. Things are better done and managed at the local level where you're closest to the people. But as soon as he's elected governor, then that whole idea of local control really stops at the governor's desk. All the power needs to be concentrated, as far as they're concerned, in Austin, in the capital. And we're already seeing bills moving through the legislative process, bills that would stop cities from banning plastic bags, as is their right. If you're a home rule city, you have the ability to elect a city council, and they can govern their own city as well as they see fit. But we're seeing that bill get some traction. We're seeing bills that prevent cities from determining what kind of oil and gas drilling is allowed within city limits and where. We're seeing bills that take cities who have listened to the business community and we're also compassionate cities, and said that you can't discriminate against communities and individuals based on whom they love and who they choose to partner with. We're seeing bills restricting cities' ability to do that and pulling that right back to Austin, where they're restricting the ability to prevent discrimination against those communities and cities that are inclined to do that. So that's one thing that we're seeing a lot of. We're going to keep an eye on that, and you'll be seeing that in emails as we make sure that you're informed of what's happening in the legislative session, why this work that you are doing is so important. One other big development that happened since the last time that we had a conversation like this, is the House budget has been released. And what we're seeing is that although there is technically additional funding that's being diverted to or allocated to public education and other programs, we're spending more money. There is still a significant amount of money that's being left on the table. In fact, in the House budget, $8.4 billion that could be allocated to priorities like pre-K and transportation and public schools that have been reeling under cuts that were made in the 2011 session that were never fully restored. That money has been left unspent in the expectation that significant tax cuts would be given. And we saw this week that the Senate has passed a spate of a package of $4.7 billion in tax cuts. This just happened yesterday. Many of those are, half of that roughly will be directed towards property taxes, and the other half will be directed towards buying down the business tax, the margins tax, otherwise known as a franchise tax. So we see where their priorities are. They've made it perfectly clear. This is sadly what they said they were going to do, and they're keeping their word. But we will keep you informed, and we're going to keep working to change the state and stop that as aggressively as we can. So one thing that I do want to bring to your attention before we open things up for questions, the floor for questions, we are piloting a brand new program over the next few months, and it's one that is very near and dear to my heart. And before I came on board to Battleground Texas, I was not an Obama guy. I did support the president, and I supported him in the primary personally, and actually worked on his campaign for 2 weeks during the primary in Texas. But I didn't travel the country and learn a lot of the things that you all are learning now, and you're great practitioners of right now. When I started, I had to learn the model as well. But I do come up from the tradition of local races here in Texas. When I was the executive director of the House Democratic Campaign Committee, and then also worked in hyper-local races like municipal races and school board races in my hometown of San Antonio. But what we're doing now is taking a model which was originally built for a national presidential campaign, and that we retooled and built out at the state level for a gubernatorial race. As you know, we also did some work on legislative campaigns in 2014, but we're taking it even more local and working on municipal races as part of a pilot program to support local candidates. So it's the first time I think we've ever entertained doing something like this. We are pulling the program together and learning a lot as we go. And our efforts will be very laser targeted in the Pasadena municipal campaigns that are up in the May 9th election. And we're going to take all those lessons that we learned. For instance, how much of an impact does a voter contact attempt have? How much impact does a conversation at the door have when your turnout rate for an election is on average about 7%? When we're used to turnout rates in gubernatorial elections that are 5 times as much, if not 10 times as much, or maybe not quite 10 times as much, but 7 or 8 or 9 times as much in a presidential year. So how much of an impact can you have? And my theory is that it can be very outsized. So we're going to test that. And we have found in the Pasadena City Council a great opportunity to make the elected officials look more like the population. The population itself is about 2/3 of color. And the electorate at this point right now is less than 50% of color. So this is a great opportunity to register a diversity of voters. And we're working with probably 6 or 7 candidates in Pasadena. We've had some great conversations as recently as today. And we look forward to pulling together a strong slate and electing and sneaking up on the Republicans and stealing some seats away. Then taking that special sauce and bottling it and sending it across the state and doing the same thing elsewhere. So That's what's on tap. That's what we're working on, and I'd be very interested to hear what you guys want to do.
Great. Well, we're going to go ahead and start with some questions that were submitted earlier today, and then move to questions on Maestro or Google Hangout. Go ahead.
So the first question that we got, and this is a question that I get frequently from volunteers, really how are we working with the party's infrastructure? And I'll read one question that we got earlier. There were several like this, but for starters, how does Cliff work with /coordinate/cooperate with the political director at the Texas Democratic Party? And how does my focus and priorities differ from those of the TDP? And the context of the question is just wants to better understand the roles between the two organizations and know who's the best resource. Truth be told, there is a broad swath of staff at the state party that we coordinate with on a, if not daily, then at least weekly basis. Yep. Every few days. In fact, right before this call got started, we had a maybe 2-hour-long meeting with Crystal Perkins, the executive director of the party, the Van administrator, Jen Cervella, and Manny Garcia, who just came back on board to join the party as the deputy executive director and communications director. So we meet frequently to talk about program. The party is still in the process of determining what its program will be for 2015 and 16, but the priorities that I've heard so far: one, van training, and this is an area where we can work together. If the party has a schedule of van trainings across the state, we want to make sure that we get that word out to volunteers, because we at this moment right now simply can't be everywhere. And it's a great way to collaborate and doesn't cost us anything to do it, and earns us, I think, some goodwill. So that's one thing that came up, collaborative training. In fact, we're also working with other organizations here in Austin, like Annie's List, Texas Organizing Project is participating in these conversations as well, to pull together a comprehensive training schedule. See, what are all the training needs across the board, from candidate training, volunteer training, to staff training, and how can we pool our resources to cover as much ground as possible across the state, and to get as many people trained up and give as many opportunities to get training as possible. So that meeting actually happens tomorrow. So I think with 2015, one thing I've seen, and I know regional efforts, regional experiences differ, but here in Austin, among the groups that are doing a lot of work in the democratic and progressive infrastructure, we're being very open and transparent about what our programs are, and looking at this as a collaborative, integrated effort, and seeing where the gaps are, and then working together to fill those. So nothing is ever 100% perfect, and we are building, I think, a new paradigm here. And again, it'll take a little work to get to the place where I think everyone is much more comfortable. And we are covering as much ground as possible on the training front, and the candidate recruitment front, candidate services, and then of course all of the field work that needs to get done. But I think we've got some projects that we can start working on now that will help lay the groundwork for better coordination for the remainder of the cycle and beyond. One other quick note, and this emerged from this meeting today: the state party is also very interested in helping local candidates on the ground. So there are certain things that we're not going to be able to provide the candidates that we hope to work with at the municipal level, but the state party can. For instance, some of the digital services, some of the design services for slate pieces. These are areas where we can split up the work and do more.
That's great.
Cool.
Next one on here. We'll do that one.
Sure. So the question is, are there NTLs joining their local county Democratic Party steering committees? And in this particular NTL's experience, our county bylaws say that the steering committee should include past party chairs and the executives of most of county Democratic organizations. And the person who submitted this question feels strongly that Battleground Texas qualifies as that. So the question is about the County Executive Committee, which is a collection of precinct chairs that serve as the steering committee or the governing board of the county party. And the experiences across the state differ. I think in some counties, there are precinct chairs who are also CTMs and NTLs. In some cases, things are just a little more separate. I think in an ideal world, there would be as much overlap as possible. And at the Neighborhood Team Summit and the conversation that a number of us had in one of the breakouts, we talked at length about how do we make that happen. There's nothing about being a precinct chair or being an NTL that should preclude you from being a precinct chair and vice versa. And I think a concerted effort to help fill the ranks of precinct chairs would be very welcome by the party. In fact, county chairs in counties where our relationship has been less than perfect have still said, absolutely, if you have NTLs or volunteers at any level who want to serve as precinct chairs, we are happy to incorporate them into the infrastructure. And to the extent that there are precinct chairs who are willing to be active, I think a concerted effort to reach out to them would be great. We've talked about at the NTS, and since then, we've talked about putting together a program where we can encourage that kind of intermingling in the major counties. And it is still something that we're working on, and it's part of the conversation that we're having with TDP as well. So over the course of 2015, we'll encourage this to happen more and more and more.
Cool. All right, now we're going to go to the phones and online. So if you have a question, you can type it into the question box on Google Hangout, or you can press 1 now over the phone and we'll get to your question. So again, press 1 or type your question to Google Hangout and we will get to it. All right, looks like there's no questions. I'm gonna call it 1, 2, 3. No, I'm just kidding. So I know that last time I got a bunch of questions when we did this with voter protection. I got a bunch of questions after the fact. So I just want to encourage everyone, if you have any questions, you know, especially for political, this is the time. You have the Battleground political director sitting in front of you at your disposal. So you can press 1 or type in the question box. Well, I guess we got to all their questions.
While we're waiting on a question, I do want to just mention, if there are candidates out there, again, we're piloting this program for May 9th in Pasadena, and a lot of great work is being done out there. I don't think it's against the rules to give a shout out to CJ Farley, to Vicki Brown, Susie, you know, working together. I think in a very short period of time, we pulled together a group of other allies at the county level. I think you'll have a very robust effort, and I think we're going to win some seats that we were not supposed to, that were not drawn for us to win. We're not advertising it too much, as we, you know, the element of surprise, I think, is going to be useful. We don't want them to call in the cavalry, but I see this coming together. I'll be in Pasadena again tomorrow. Danny and I were just there on Monday, and I think this is going to be the start of a really strong program that's going to make major change in the state. So if there are campaigns where we might not have this same kind of pilot program, but we should be aware of, because they're good progressives who are running against awful conservatives, then please let us know. We know they're nonpartisan. Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to have an understanding of how many opportunities just like this that there are across the state, and how interested you think that, you know, well, one, you yourself, but also the volunteers that you work with would be in working with these campaigns. That'd be very helpful feedback.
Great. I'm going to do one last call for any questions. You can press 1 or type it in, and then we will wrap this up and it'll be posted online. Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you all for being on tonight. Appreciate the questions beforehand, and we will catch you again soon. Bye.
Thanks, guys.